H.P.B. on Psychical Phenomena. Articles by H.P. Blavatsky. War in Olympus. The Drift of Western Spiritualism. Logic versus Peripatetic. Queries and Answers. Introversion of Mental Vision. Hypnotism and its relations to other modes of fascination. A Case of Obsession. H.P. Blavatsky. Series Number 9. Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Ltd. Bangalore 560-004. Objects of the Theosophical movement. I. To form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. 2. The study of ancient and modern religions, philosophies, and sciences, and the demonstration of the importance of such study. And 3. The investigation of the unexplained laws of nature and the psychical powers latent in man. T.I. Mar. I5 AGT 93 R7. At R. Masp I1. The articles of H.P. Blavatsky and W.Q. Judge, which originally appeared in the Theosophist, Lucifer, and the Path, were issued in pamphlet form by the Theosophy Company, Los Angeles, USA. For the benefit of students and inquirers in India, these are now being reprinted in an Indian edition. Reprint edition, 1982 EJ 97, CRA X 75 IR7 JSSB, I Lazelle. RU. I. T. 17. I asterisk I. X7J asterisk Li 999 by courtesy, The Theosophy Company, 245, West 33rd St., Los Angeles, California. 90007, USA. Printed by V. N. Iyer at Commercial Printing House, 41/1, 3rd Main Road, Gandhinagar, Bangalore 560-009, and published by J. M. Tijoriwala for Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4, Sir Krishna Rao Road, Basavangudi, Bangalore 560-004. Forward. The reader of this group of articles by H.P. Blavatsky has opportunity to gain some realization of the impact on Western thought of the wave of psychical phenomena which occurred during the last half of the 19th century, and to see how, at her hands, these strange happenings were made to serve the purposes of the Theosophical movement. War in Olympus, which appeared in the first issue, November, 1879, of the Theosophist, the magazine founded by H.P.B. in India, deals with the intense controversy precipitated in scientific circles in Europe, as the result of the admission by several leading scientists of the reality of spiritualistic phenomena. While not sharing the views of the spiritualists concerning the forces or intelligences behind the phenomena, H.P.B. defended their champions against attacks based upon blind denial of such possibilities, and she went on to show that, if recognized as happenings which were inexplicable in merely physical terms, the demonstrations of the spiritualists could be regarded as a needed antidote to the extreme skepticism inherited from the 18th century. The drift of Western spiritualism, which first appeared in the Theosophist for October 1, 1879, pointed to the wealth of enlightening material to be found in the psychological lore of ancient Oriental literature. The meaning of the phenomena, H.P.B. proposed, could be discovered with the help of the ancient teachings that were to be published in her Theosophical journal. In Logic versus Peripatetic, published in the Theosophist for April, 1881, H.P.B. takes a journalist to task for defending traditional Christian beliefs simply on the ground that they are cherished and familiar, while ridiculing certain Theosophists and some spiritualists for their views. A large part of a newspaper report of the feats of an Indian wonder worker is reprinted by H.P.B. in her article, Queries and Answers, which was published in Lucifer for September, 1890. This review, provided in reply to a question by a Lucifer subscriber, gives the reader a detailed account of the extraordinary performance of a fakir. The newspaper article attempts to dispose of what was witnessed by the spectators as mere hypnotism, but H.P.B. indicates that far more than this was involved and challenges Western hypnotists to duplicate the fakir's achievements. She values the report for its factual revelations, however, suggesting that they corroborate the Theosophical teachings. Introversion of Mental Vision, from the Theosophist, February, 1884, is concerned with a little-known psychological law, the effects of which have been noted by psychic researchers. Shortly before she died, H.P.B. published in Lucifer for December 1890, her important analysis, Hypnotism and its relations to other modes of fascination. The vital distinction between mesmerism and hypnotism is made clear, and the writer supplies explanatory statements on the processes of this sort of psychic influence which are not found elsewhere. A Case of Obsession was printed in the Theosophist H.R. May, 1880. Here H.P.B. gives the rationale of one of the most puzzling and dangerous of psychic disorders, showing, once again, the importance of a knowledge of Eastern philosophy for reaching an explanation of contagions of this sort. What is said in this article lends force to the warnings so often given in theosophical literature concerning the risks of holding seances and visiting mediums. War in Olympus by H.P. Blavatsky. Dark clouds are gathering over the hitherto cold and serene horizon of exact science, which forebode a squall. Already two camps are forming among the votaries of scientific research. One wages war on the other, and hard words are occasionally exchanged. The apple of discord in this case is spiritualism. Fresh and illustrious victims are yearly decoyed away from the impregnable strongholds of materialistic negation, and ensnared into examining and testing the alleged spiritual phenomena. And we all know that when a true scientist examines them without prejudice, well, he generally ends like Professor Hare, Mr. William Crookes, F.R.S., the great Alfred Russel Wallace, another F.R.S., and so many other eminent men of science he passes over to the enemy. We are really curious to know what will be the new theory advanced in the present crisis by the skeptics, and how they will account for such an apostasy of several of their luminaries, as has just occurred. The venerable accusations of non-compass menus, and dotage will not bear another refurbishing. The eminent perverts are increasing numerically so fast, that if mental incapacity is charged upon all of them who experimentally satisfy themselves that tables can talk sense, and mediums float through the air, it might augur ill for science. There might soon be none but weakened brains in the learned societies. They may, possibly, for a time find some consolation in accounting for the lodgment of the extraordinary delusion in very scholarly heads, upon the theory of atavism, the mysterious law of latent transmission, so much favored by the modern schools of Darwinian evolutionism, especially in Germany. As represented by that thoroughgoing apostle of modern struggle for culture, Ernst Haeckel, professor at Jena. They may attribute the belief of their colleagues in the phenomena to certain molecular movements of the cell in the ganglia of their once powerful brains, hereditarily transmitted to them by their ignorant medieval ancestors. Or, again, they may split their ranks, and establishing an imperium in imperio divide and conquer still. All this is possible, but time alone will show which of the parties will come off best. We have been led to these reflections by a row now going on between German and Russian professors, all eminent and illustrious savants. The Teutons and Slavs, in the case under observation, are not fighting according to their nationality but conformably to their respective beliefs and unbeliefs. Having concluded, for the occasion, an offensive as well as a defensive alliance, regardless of race, they have broken up in two camps, one representing the spiritualists, and the other the skeptics. And now war to the knife is declared. Leading one party, are Professors Stelner, Ulrichsee, and Fichte, Buddelroth and Wagner, of the Leipzig, Halle, and St. Petersburg universities. The other follows Professors Wundt, Mendeleev, and a host of other German and Russian celebrities. Hardly has Zollner, a most renowned astronomer and physicist, printed his confessions of faith in Dr. Slade's mediumistic phenomena and set his learned colleagues aghast when Professor Ulrichsee of the Halle University arouses the wrath of the Olympus of science by publishing a pamphlet entitled The So-Called Spiritualism, a Scientific Question, intended as a complete refutation of the arguments of Professor Wundt, of the Leipzig University, against the modern belief, and contained in another pamphlet ca. led by its author Spiritualism, the So-Called Scientific Question. And now steps in another active combatant, Mr. Buddelroth, professor of chemistry and natural sciences, of St. Petersburg, who narrates his experiments in London, with the medium Williams, and thus rouses up a most ferocious polemic. The humorist Psychical illustrated paper Kladderatic executes a war dance, and shouts with joy, while the more serious conservative papers are indignant. Pressed behind their last entrenchments by the cool and uncontrovertible assertions of a most distinguished naturalist, the critics led forward by the St. Petersburg Star, Mr. Bourinine, seem desperate, and evidently short of ammunition, since they are reduced to the expedient of trying to rout the enemy with the most remarkable paradoxes. The pro and con of the dispute are too interesting, and our posterity might complain, were the incidents suffered to be left beyond the reach of English and American readers interested in spiritualism, by remaining confined to the German and Russian newspapers. So, Homer-like, we will follow the combatants and condense this modernly ad for the benefit of our friends. After several years of diligent research and investigation of the phenomena, Messrs. Wagner and Buddelroth, both distinguished savants and professors in St. Petersburg University, became thoroughly convinced of the reality of the weird manifestations. As a result, both wrote numerous and strong articles in the leading periodicals in defense of the mischievous epidemic as in his moments of unconscious cerebration and prepossession in favor of his own hobby. Dr. Carpenter calls spiritualism. Both of the above eminent gentlemen, are endowed with those precious qualities, which are the more to be respected as they are so seldom met with among our men of science. These qualities, admitted by their critic himself, Mr. Bourinine, are, 1. A serious and profound conviction that what they defend is true, 2. An unwavering courage in stating at every hazard, before a prejudiced and inimical public that such is their conviction, 3. Clearness and consecutiveness in their statements, 4. The serene calmness and impartiality with which they treat the opinions of their opponents, 5. A full and profound acquaintance with the subject under discussion. The combination of the qualities enumerated, adds their critic, leads us to regard the recent article by Professor Buddelroth, Empiricism and Dogmatism in the Domain of Mediumship, as one of those essays whose commending significance cannot be denied and which are sure to strongly impress the readers. Such articles are positively rare in our periodicals, rare because of the originality of the author's conclusions, and because of the clear, precise, and serious presentation of facts. The article so eulogized may be summed up in a few words. We will not stop to enumerate the marvels of spiritual phenomena witnessed by Professor Zollner with drive, slayed and defended by Professor Buddelroth, since they are no more marvelous than the latter gentleman's personal experience in this direction with Mr. Williams, a medium of London, in 1876. The séances took place in a London hotel in the room occupied by the Honourable Alexander Aksakov, Russian Imperial Councillor, in which, with the exception of this gentleman, there were but two other persons, Prof. Buddelroth and the medium. Confederacy was thus utterly impossible. And now, what took place under these conditions, which so impressed one of the first scientists of Russia? Simply this: Mr. Williams, the medium, was made to sit with his hands, feet, and even his person tightly bound with cords to his chair, which was placed in a dead-wall corner of the room, behind Mr. Buddelroth's plaid hung across so as to form a screen. Williams soon fell into a kind of lethargic stupor, known among spiritualists as the trance condition, and spirits began to appear before the eyes of the investigators. Various voices were heard, and loud sentences, pronounced by the invisibles, from every part of the room, things, toilet appurtenances and so forth, began flying in every direction through the air, and finally John King, a sort of king of the spooks, who has been famous for years, made his appearance bodily. But we must allow Professor Buddelroth to tell his phenomenal story himself. We first saw moving, he writes, several bright lights in the air, and immediately after that appeared the full figure of John King. His apparition is generally preceded by a greenish phosphoric light which, gradually becoming brighter, illuminates more and more the whole bust of John King. then it is that those present perceive that the light emanates from some kind of a luminous object held by the spirit. The face of a man with a thick black beard becomes clearly distinguishable, the head is enveloped in a white turban. The figure appears outside the cabinet, that is to say, the screened corner where the medium sat, and finally approaches us. We saw it each time for a few seconds, then rapidly waning, the light was extinguished and the figure became invisible to reappear again in a moment or two, then from the surrounding darkness, John's voice is heard proceeding from the spot on which he had appeared mostly, though not always, when he had already disappeared. John asked us, "What can I do for you?" and Mr. Aksakoff requested him to rise up to the ceiling and from there speak to us. In accordance with the wish expressed, the figure suddenly appeared above the table and towered majestically above our heads to the ceiling, which became all illuminated with the luminous object held in the spirit's hand. When John was quite under the ceiling, he shouted down to us, "Will that do?" During another séance Butterove asked John to approach him quite near, which the spirit did, and so gave him the opportunity of seeing clearly the sparkling, clear eyes of John. Another spirit, Peter, though he never put in a visible appearance during the séances, yet conversed with Messrs. Butterove and Aksakoff, wrote for them on paper furnished by them, and so forth. Though the learned professor minutely enumerates all the precautions he had taken against possible fraud, the critic is not yet satisfied, and asks, pertinently enough, why did not the respectable savant catch John in his arms, when the spirit was but at a foot's distance from him? Again, why did not both Messrs. Aksakoff and Butterove try to get hold of John's legs, when he was mounting to the ceiling? Indeed, they ought to have done all this, if they are really so anxious to learn the truth for their own sake, as for that of science, when they struggle to lead on toward the domains of the other world. And, had they complied with such a simple and, at the same time, very little scientific test, there would be no more need for them, perhaps, to further explain the scientific importance of the spiritual manifestations. That this importance is not exaggerated, and has as much significance for the world of science, as for that of religious thought, is proved by so many philosophical minds speculating upon the modern delusion. This is what Fichte, the learned German savant, says of it. Modern spiritualism chiefly proves the existence of that which, in common parlance, is very vaguely and inaptly termed apparition of spirits. If we concede the reality of such apparitions, then they become an undeniable, practical proof of continuation of our personal, conscious existence, beyond the portals of death. And such a tangible, fully demonstrated fact cannot be otherwise but beneficent in this epoch, which, having fallen into a dreary denial of immortality, thinks, in the proud self-sufficiency of its vast intellect, that it has already happily left behind it every superstition of the kind. If such a tangible evidence could be really found, and demonstrated to us, beyond any doubt or cavil, reasons Fichte further on, if the reality of the continuation of our lives after death were furnished us upon positive proof, in strict accordance with the logical elements of experimental nature sciences, then it would be, indeed, a result with which, owing to its nature and peculiar signification for humanity, no other result to be met with in all the history of civilization could be compared. The old problem about man's destination upon earth would be thus solved, and consciousness in humanity would be elevated one step. That which, hitherto, could be revealed to man but in the domain of blind faith, presentiment and passionate hope, would become to him positive knowledge. He would have acquired the certainty that he was a member of an eternal, a spiritual world, in which he would continue living, and that his temporary existence upon this earth forms but a fractional portion of a future eternal life, and that it is only there that he would be enabled to perceive, and fully comprehend his real destination. Having acquired this profound conviction, mankind would be thoroughly impressed with a new and animating comprehension of life, and its intellectual perceptions open to an idealism strong with incontrovertible facts. This would prove tantamount to a complete reconstruction of man in relation to his existence as an entity and mission upon earth. It would be, so to say, a new birth. Whoever has lost all inner convictions as to his eternal destination, his faith in eternal life, whether the case be that of an isolated individual, a whole nation, or the representative of a certain epoch, he or it may be regarded as having had uprooted, and to the very core, all sense of that invigorating force which alone lends itself to self-devotion and to progress. Such a man becomes what was inevitable, an egotistical, selfish, sensual being, concerned wholly for his self-preservation. His culture, his enlightenment and civilization, can serve him but as a help and ornamentation toward that life of sensualism, or, at best, to guard him from all that can harm it. Such is the enormous importance attributed by Professor Fichte and Professor Buddelroof of Germany and Russia to the spiritual phenomena, and we may say the feeling is more than sincerely echoed in England by Mr. A.R. Wallace, F.R.S., see his Miracles and Modern Spiritualism. An influential American scientific journal uses an equally strong language when speaking of the value that a scientific demonstration of the survival of the human soul would have for the world. If spiritualism prove true, it says, it will become the one grand event of the world's history. It will give an imperishable luster of glory to the 19th century. Its discoverer will have no rival in renown, and his name will be written high above any other. If the pretensions of spiritualism have a rational foundation, no more important work has been offered to men of science than their verification. Scientific American, 1874, as quoted in Alcott's People from the Other World, P.V., preferred. And now we will see what the stubborn Russian critic, who seems to be but the mouthpiece of European materialistic science, has to say in response to the unanswerable arguments and logic of Messrs. Fichte and Buddelroof. If skepticism has no stronger arguments to oppose to spiritualism but the following original paradox, then we will have to declare it worsted in the dispute. Instead of the beneficial results foretold by Fichte in the case of the final triumph of spiritualism, the critic forecasts quite a different state of things. As soon, he says, as such scientific methods shall have demonstrated, beyond doubt or cavil, to the general satisfaction, that our world is crammed with souls of men who have preceded us, and whom we will all join in turn, as soon as it shall be proven that these souls of the deceased can communicate with mortals, all earthly physical science of the eminent scholars will vanish like a soap bubble, and will have lost all its interest for us living men. Why should people care for their proportionately short life upon earth, once that they have a positive assurance and conviction of another life to come after the bodily death, a death which does not in the least preclude conscious relations with the world of the living, or even their post-mortem participation in all its interests? Once, that with the help of science, based on mediumistic experiments and the discoveries of spiritualism, such relations shall have been firmly established, they will naturally become with every day more and more intimate. An extraordinary friendship will ensue between his and other worlds. That other world will begin divulging to this one the most occult mysteries of life and death, and the hitherto most inaccessible laws of the universe, those which now exact the greatest efforts of man's mental powers. Finally, nothing will remain for us in this temporary world to either do or desire, but to pass away as soon as possible into the world of eternity. No inventions, no observations, no sciences will be any more needed. Why should people exercise their brains, for instance, in perfecting the telegraphs, when nothing else will be required but to be on good terms with spirits in order to avail of their services for the instantaneous transmission of thoughts and objects, not only from Europe to America, but even to the moon, if so desired? The following are a few of the results which a communion de facto between this world and the other, that certain men of science are hoping to establish by the help of spiritualism, will inevitably lead us to the complete extinction of all science, and even of the human race, which will be ever rushing onward to a better life. The learned and scholarly fantasists who are so anxious to promote the science of spiritualism, i.e., of a close communication between the two worlds, ought to bear the above in mind. To which, the scholarly fantasists would be quite warranted in answering that one would have to bring his own mind to the exact measure of microscopic capacity required to elaborate such a theory as this, before he could take it into consideration at all. Is the above meant to be offered as an objection for serious consideration? Strange logic. We are asked to believe that, because these men of science, who now believe in naught but matter, and thus try to fit every phenomenon even of a mental, and spiritual character, within the Procrustean bed of their own preconceived hobbies, would find themselves by the mere strength of circumstances forced, in their turn, to fit these cherished hobbies to truth, however unwelcome, and to facts wherever found, that because of that, science will lose all its charm for humanity. Nay, life itself will become a burden. There are millions upon millions of people who, without believing in spiritualism at all, yet have faith in another and a better world. And were that blind faith to become positive knowledge indeed, it could but better humanity. Before closing his scathing criticism upon the credulous men of science, our reviewer sends one more bomb in their direction, which unfortunately, like many other explosive shells, misses the culprits and wounds the whole group of their learned colleagues. We translate the missile verbatim, this time for the benefit of all the European and American academicians. The eminent professor, he adds, speaking of Buttelroth, and his article, among other things, makes the most of the strange fact that spiritualism gains with every day more and more converts within the corporation of our great scientists. He enumerates a long list of English and German names among illustrious men of science, who have more or less confessed themselves in favor of the spiritual doctrines. Among these names we find such as are quite authoritative, those of the greatest luminaries of science. Such a fact is, to say the least, very striking, and in any case, lends a great weight to spiritualism. But we have only to ponder coolly over it, to come very easily to the conclusion that it is just among such great men of science that spiritualism is most likely to spread and find ready converts. With all their powerful intellects and gigantic knowledge, our great scholars are firstly men of sedentary habits, and, secondly, they are, with scarcely an exception, men with diseased and shattered nerves, inclined toward an abnormal development of an overstrained brain. Such sedentary men are the easiest to hoodwink, a clever charlatan will make an easier prey of, and bamboozle with far more facility a scholar than an unlearned but practical man. Hallucination will far sooner get hold of persons inclined to nervous receptivity, especially if they once concentrate themselves upon some peculiar ideas, or a favorite hobby. This, I believe, will explain the fact that we see so many men of science enrolling themselves in the army of spiritualists. We need not stop to inquire how Messrs. Tyndall, Huxley, Darwin, Herbert Spencer, Lewis, and other eminent scientific and philosophical skeptics, will like such a prospect of rickety ganglionic centers, collective softening of the brain, and the resulting hallucinations. The argument is not only an impertinent naivete, but a literary monstrosity. We are far from agreeing entirely with the views of Professor Buttelroth, or even M.R. Wallace, as to the agencies at work behind the modern phenomena, yet between the extremes of spiritual negation and affirmation, there ought to be a middle ground. Only pure philosophy can establish truth upon firm principles, and no philosophy can be complete unless it embraces both physics and metaphysics. Mr. Tyndall, who declares, Science and Man, that metaphysics will be welcomed when it abandons its pretensions to scientific discovery, and consents to be ranked as a kind of poetry, opens himself to the criticism of posterity. Meanwhile, he must not regard it as an impertinence if his spiritualistic opponents retort with the answer that physics will always be welcomed, when it abandons its pretensions to psychological discovery. The physicists will have to consent to be regarded in a near future as no more than supervisors and analysts of physical results, who have to leave the spiritual causes to those who believe in them. Whatever the issue of the present quarrel, we fear, though, that spiritualism has made its appearance a century too late. Our age is preeminently one of extremes. The earnest philosophical, yet reverent doubters are few, and the name for those who rush to the opposite extreme is legion. We are the children of our century. Thanks to that same law of atavism, it seems to have inherited from its parent the 18th century of both Voltaire and Jonathan Edwards all its extreme skepticism, and, at the same time, religious credulity and bigoted intolerance. Spiritualism is an abnormal and premature. 12 H.P.B. On psychical phenomena outgrowth, standing between the two, and, though it stands right on the highway to truth, its ill-defined beliefs make it wander on through bypaths which lead to anything but philosophy. Its future depends wholly upon the timely help it can receive from honest science, that science which scorns no truth. It was, perhaps, when thinking of the opponents of the latter, that Alfred de Musset wrote the following magnificent apostrophe: "Sleepest thou content, Voltaire, and thy dread smile hovers it still above thy fleshless bones. Thine age they call too young to understand thee, this one should suit thee better, one high men are born. And the huge edifice that, day and night, thy great hands undermined, is fallen upon us." The drift of Western spiritualism. L8 advices from various parts of the world seem to indicate that, while there is an increasing interest in the phenomena of spiritualism, especially among eminent men of science, there is also a growing desire to learn the views of the Theosophists. The first impulse of hostility has nearly spent itself, and the moment approaches when a patient hearing will be given to our arguments. This was foreseen by us from the beginning. The founders of our society were mainly veteran spiritualists, who had outgrown their first amazement at the strange phenomena, and felt the necessity to investigate the laws of mediumship to the very bottom. Their reading of medieval and ancient works upon the occult sciences had shown them that our modern phenomena were but repetitions of what had been seen, studied, and comprehended in former epochs. In the biographies of ascetics, mystics, theurgists, prophets, ecstatics, of astrologers, diviners, magicians, sorcerers, and other students, subjects, or practitioners of the occult power in its many branches, they found ample evidence that Western spiritualism could only be comprehended by the creation of a science of comparative psychology. By a like synthetic method, the philologists, under the lead of Eugene Bourneuf, had unlocked the secrets of religious and philological heredity, and exploded Western theological theories and dogmas until then deemed impregnable. Proceeding in this spirit, the Theosophists thought they discovered some reasons to doubt the correctness of the spiritualistic theory that all the phenomena of the circles must of necessity be attributed solely to the action of spirits of our deceased friends. The ancients knew and classified other supracorporeal entities that are capable of moving objects, floating the bodies of mediums through the air, giving apparent tests of the identity of dead persons, and controlling sensitives to write and speak strange languages, paint pictures, and play on unfamiliar musical instruments. And not only knew them, but showed how these invisible powers might be controlled by man, and made to work these wonders at his bidding. They found, moreover, that there were two sides of occultism, a good and an evil side, and that it was a dangerous and fearful thing for the inexperienced to meddle with the latter, dangerous to our moral as to our physical nature. The conviction forced itself upon their minds, then, that while the weird wonders of spiritualism were among the most important of all that could be studied, mediumship, without the most careful attention to every condition, was fraught with peril. Thus thinking, and impressed with the great importance of a thorough knowledge of mesmerism and all other branches of occultism, these founders established the Theosophical Society, to read, inquire, compare, study, experiment and expound, the mysteries of psychology. This range of inquiry, of course, included an investigation of Vedic, Brahmanical, and other ancient Oriental literature, for in that especially the former, the grandest repository of wisdom ever accessible to humanity, lay the entire mystery of nature and of man. To comprehend modern mediumship it is, in short, indispensable to familiarize oneself with the yoga philosophy, and the aphorisms of Patanjali are even more essential than the divine revelations of Andrew Jackson Davis. We can never know how much of the mediumistic phenomena we must attribute to the disembodied, until it is settled how much can be done by the embodied, human soul, and the blind but active powers at work within those regions which are yet unexplored by science. Not even proof of an existence beyond the grave, if it must come to us in a phenomenal shape. This will be conceded without qualification, we think, provided that the records of history be admitted as corroborating the statements we have made. The reader will observe that the primary issue between the theosophical and spiritualistic theories of mediumistic phenomena is that the theosophists say the phenomena may be produced by more agencies than one, and the latter that but one agency can be conceded, namely the disembodied souls. There are other differences as, for instance, that there can be such a thing as the obliteration of the human individuality as the result of very evil environment, that good spirits seldom, if ever, cause physical manifestations, etc. But the first point to settle is the one here first stated, and we have shown how and in what directions the theosophists maintain that the investigations should be pushed. Our East Indian readers, unlike those of Western countries who may see these lines, do not know how warmly and stoutly the drift of Western spiritualism issues have been debated, these past 3 or 4 years. Suffice it to say that, a point having been reached where arguments seemed no longer profitable, the controversy ceased, and that the present visit of the New York Theosophists, and their establishment of the Bombay headquarters, with the library, lectures, and this journal, are its tangible results. That this step must have a very great influence upon Western psychological science is apparent. Whether our committee are themselves fully competent to observe and properly expound Eastern psychology or not, no one will deny that Western science must inevitably be enriched by the contributions of the Indian, Sinhalese, and other mystics who will now find in the Theosophist a channel by which to reach European and American students of occultism, such as was never imagined, not to say seen, before. It is our earnest hope and belief that after the broad principles of our society, its earnestness and exceptional facilities for gathering Oriental wisdom are well understood, it will be better thought of than now by spiritualists, and attract into its fellowship many more of their brightest and best intellects. Theosophy can be styled the enemy of spiritualism with no more propriety than of mesmerism, or any other branch of psychology. In this wondrous outburst of phenomena that the Western world has been seeing since 1848, is presented such an opportunity to investigate the hidden mysteries of being as the world has scarcely known before. Theosophists only urge that these phenomena shall be studied so thoroughly that our epoch shall not pass away with the mighty problem unsolved. Whatever obstructs this, whether the narrowness of sciolism, the dogmatism of theology, or the prejudice of any other class, should be swept aside as something hostile to the public interest. Theosophy, with its design to search back into historic records for proof, may be regarded as the natural outcome of phenomenalistic spiritualism, or as a touchstone to show the value of its pure gold. One must know both to comprehend what is man. Logic versus peripatetic it is hardly the province of our journal to notice the fugitive vagaries of occasional correspondence in daily papers, unless by chance some article happens to contain some useful or very interesting and quite impersonal information. We have held to the good rule till now, and hope to continue. On this principle we would have hardly given any attention to a certain paragraph in the Bombay Gazette, March 16, 1881, signed Your Peripatetic, and headed Current Philosophy, were it not for the strong illustration it affords us of that perverse spirit, called respectable deference to public opinion, but which for short we call hypocrisy. The writer in question throws stones into our garden, and, but for our having by this time grown somewhat indifferent to that sort of thing, we might well find in his personalities alone abundant excuse for retorting upon him. But we have a far more serious object in view, and this once the speculative lucubrations of the current philosopher will do us better service than his party have perhaps bargained for. For us, Peripatetic decidedly represents a party. He is the mouthpiece of that majority in our modern-day society which has worked itself out an elaborate policy full of sophistry and paradox, behind which every member clumsily hides his own personal views. The words of their revelation, I would thou wert cold or hot, apply to our modern society far better than to the Church of Laodiceans, and knowing their works and that they are neither cold nor hot, but like a faithful thermometer follow the changing moral temperature of the day, we will now analyze some of the desultory rhapsodies of the writer on current philosophy. When we have done that, he is at liberty to go on chuckling over his Penwictricity's rather stale nunciation of simplicity of Mr. and the Simla occultists. The simplicity of the gentleman whom the peripatetic names in the Gazette in full an example of bad breeding we shall surely not follow. Being an adjective applied by him to a man of the most acute and remarkable intellect, and one whose ability and talents are universally recognized throughout India and Europe, speaks ill, by the by, for his own powers of discrimination. When one presumes to sign himself a peripatetic, he ought to honor his classical pseudonym by at least borrowing some logic for the occasion if he has none himself to spare. Having thus cursorily noticed the poor fling at the Simla simpletons, we will now lay before our readers a sample of the logic of that alleged pupil of Aristotle, which peripatetic so paradoxically assumes to be. Quoting Carlyle's famous proposition, who may have had such peripatetics in mind, that the population of Great Britain consists of 30 millions mostly fools, and having offered by way of self-incense on the altar of patriotism his own postulate that the intellect of the average Briton is however, certainly higher than the average intellect of general humanity, the critic proceeds, if we may be forgiven the Americanism, to scalp believers in phenomena. The simplicity of the Simla occultists, however, he confesses, is outdone by the innocence of some titled people who, according to the evidence of a witness in the Fletcher trial, will believe anything, a statement which appears strictly accurate. Fletcher and company, together with 2/3 of the trading professional mediums, we may leave to his tender mercies. Having denounced these for the last 6 years, we even heartily agree in some respects with the writer, as, for instance, when he deprecates those who would believe anything. No one of the overcredulous who recognize so readily in dark seances, in every shadow on the wall or in the medium's pocket handkerchief, their aunt, or uncle, or somebody has any right to complain if they are regarded as fools, though even in such cases, it is far more honorable to be found out to be an honest fool, than a cheating medium. Nor do we blame the writer for laughing at those who so trustingly believe that when it pleased the medium to wind up the musical box, one of this intellectual audience asserted that he felt that virtue had gone out of him, and that this magnetism was winding up the box. Uncharitable though it be, it is yet natural. And were peripatetic to stop his philosophical disquisitions with the just remark. And yet probably these titled fools would be ready enough to talk of the dark superstitions of the benighted Hindu, or indeed, if they happen to be fervent Protestants, of the superstitions of their Catholic neighbors, while doubtless believing that they themselves were making a scientific investigation. This review of his current philosophy need never have seen print. We would not have even noticed the ridiculous blunder he falls into, with so many other critics, in confusing phenomena for which the agency of disembodied spirits is claimed, with natural phenomena for which every tithe of supernaturalism is rejected. We might have overlooked his ignorance, as he was, perhaps, never told that natural are the only phenomena Theosophists accept, and the only way they are trying to fathom the mystery, and that their object is precisely to put down every element of superstition or belief in the miraculous or the supernatural, instead of countenancing it as he believes. But what are we to think of a philosopher, an alleged peripatetic, who after exercising a secular reasoning upon the folly of the superstitious beliefs of the spiritualists and the occultists, winds up his arguments with the most unexpected rhetorical somersault ever made? The proposition which he emits in the same breath seems so preposterously illogical and monstrous, that we can characterize it but in the felicitous words of Southey, viz., as one of the most untenable that ever was advanced by a perverse, paradoxical intellect. Listen to him and judge, ye logicians and true disciples of Aristotle. No, no, exclaims our philosopher, Religious beliefs which are imbibed with our mother's milk, and which most around us accept, cannot be regarded as superstitions. It is natural to the human mind to regard doctrines presented to it with the authority of bygone generations as probable and natural. Earnest belief of this nature may not always command our respect, but it must invariably attract our sympathy. The superstitious follies of table-turners and spiritists of all sorts can only command our hearty contempt. How much exposure will be necessary to teach persons of this sort that secrets of nature which have been hidden from investigators like Newton, Davy, Faraday, and Tyndall are not likely to be open to them? And we beg leave to tell him, that he, who does not believe in spiritualism cannot believe in Christianity, for the very foundation of that faith is the materialization of their Savior. A Christian, if he has any right at all to attack spiritual phenomena, can do so but on the ground of the dogmas of his religion. He can say such manifestations are of the devil, but dare not say they are impossible, and do not exist. For, if spiritualism and occultism are a superstition and a falsehood, then is Christianity, the same Christianity with its Mosaic miracles and witches of Endor. Its resurrections and materialization of angels, and hundreds of other spiritual and occult phenomena. Does Peripatetic forget, that while there are many real inquirers among well-known men of science, like Messrs. Wallace, Crookes, Wagner, Buttelroth, Zollner, Hare, Fichte, and Camille Flammarion, who have thoroughly investigated and hence thoroughly believe in the phenomena called spiritual till a better name is found, and in some cases are even spiritualists themselves, no Tyndall, no Huxley, no Faraday, no investigator yet since the world was created, has ever been able to prove, let alone one of the really just human dogmas, but even the existence of a God or of the soul. We are not spiritualists, and, therefore, speak impartially. If religious earnest belief invariably attracts our sympathy even without commanding our respect, why should not as earnest a belief in spiritual phenomena, that most consoling, most sacred of all beliefs, hope in the survival of those whom we most loved while on earth, attract our sympathy as well? Is it because it is unscientific and that exact science fails to always prove it? But religion is far more unscientific yet. Is belief in the Holy Ghost, we ask, less blind than belief in the ghosts of our departed fathers and mothers? Is faith in an abstract and never to be scientifically proven principle any more respectable or worthy of sympathy than that other faith of believers as earnest as Christians are that the spirits of those whom they loved best on earth, their mothers, children, friends, are ever near them, though their bodies may be gone? Surely we imbibe with our mother's milk as much love for her as for a mythical Mother of God. And if one is not to be regarded as a superstition, then how far less the other? We think that if Professor Tyndall or M.R. Huxley were forced to choose between belief in the materialization of the Virgin Mary at Lourdes or Knock, and that of their own mothers in a séance room, they would rather risk to pass for fools in the latter locality. For phenomena, however rarely, have yet more than once been proved real and so announced by men of undoubted authority in science. Phenomena are based upon scientific grounds, on facts pertaining to exact science, upon physiology, pathology, magnetism, all correlating into psychological manifestations. Physical as well as psychological phenomena court experiment and the investigations of science, whereas, supernatural religion dreads and avoids such. The former claims no miracles, no supernaturalism to hang its faith upon, while religion imperatively demands them, and invariably collapses whenever such belief is withdrawn. Personally, as we said before, we do not believe in the agency of disembodied spirits in the physical mediumistic phenomena, but it gives us no right for all that, to dogmatize and try to force others to reject their belief. All that we can say now is, that the last word has not yet been told of these phenomena, and that as Theosophists, i.e. searchers after truth who claim no infallibility, we say that the spiritualists after all may be as right in their way as we think we are right in ours. That no spiritualist has ever believed in miracles or supernatural interferences, their immense literature well proves. Can peripatetic say as much of Christian belief? Here the Bishop of Bombay proclaim publicly his professions of faith. We, he says to his clergy, who by professional honor are bound to maintain and to set forth the supremacy of the supernatural over the natural, have staked our very social existence on the reality and the claims of the supernatural. Our dress, our status, our work, the whole of our daily surroundings, are a standing protest to the world of the importance of spiritual things, that they surpass, in our eyes at least, the more aggressive pretensions of what is temporal. We are bound then for our own self-respect to justify what we daily proclaim. And so is every believer bound to do in whatsoever he may believe, if he be but honest. But the whole status of modern faith I reflected in these Jesuitical words of peripatetic. Belief in the supernatural may not command his respect, but he feels obliged to sympathize with it, for it is that of those around him, and considered respectable. In short, it is the bread and cheese state religion, and perchance that of his principles and superiors. And yet for as honest and earnest a belief as spiritualism, he has but contempt. Why? Because it is unpopular, because his society people who were forced into such a belief by the evidence of facts hide it from the others, and Nicodemus like they run to its professors but under the cover of night. It is not fashionable. Religion and spiritualism are in society relatively like peg drinking and cigarette smoking. A lady who will not blush to empty in the view of all a tumbler of stiff brandy and soda, will stare, in shocked amazement, at another of her sex smoking an innocent cigarette. Therefore, is it too that the writer in the Gazette, who ought to have called himself a sophist, signs himself a peripatetic. He is certainly not a Christian, for were he one, he would never have ventured upon the lapsus calami which makes him confess that Christianity may not always command our respect, but still he would pass for one. Such is the tendency of our 19th century that a man of the educated, civilized world, will rather utter the most illogical, absurd sophism than honestly confess his belief either one way or the other. It is natural, he finds, to the human mind to regard doctrines presented to it with the authority of bygone generations as probable and natural. If this be so, we invite all the peripatetics, past, present and future, to point out to us a doctrine half as tenacious of life, or more universally believed in by countless bygone generations, in every corner of the world, than the faith in ghosts and spirits. Really and indeed, we prefer 1,000 times an honest, abusive, uncompromising bigot to a mild-spoken, sneering hypocrite. Queries and answers. We are asked by a subscriber in America to comment upon a curious report in the Chicago Tribune, which he sends us. We do so the more willingly as it contains a very ingenious, newly invented dodge to detect the real nature of the mango tree growing, boy and basket performance and other like phenomena produced by Indian jugglers, and an alleged scientific explanation of the same. The latter, however, is as old as the hills, and known to every occultist, and has never been made a secret of. The heading of the article: "It is only hypnotism, is it only that?" pretends to let the cat out of the bag, and the Chicagoan interviewer seems very proud of this achievement of his countrymen. But, to facts, let us see how Indian fakirs deceive those who watch them. Fred S. Elmore, a young Chicagoan, demonstrates the truth of his theory at Gaya, India. Mango trees, babies, and other objects created by the fakir shown to be creatures of the imagination. How a clever scheme was worked. Nearly every traveler who comes back from India brings with him more or less marvelous stories of the performances of Indian fakirs or jugglers. No one ever heard of one of these tales without being curious to know the explanation of the mystery. All sorts of theories have been offered, all of which are more or less unsatisfactory. It has remained for a young Chicagoan to furnish an explanation that explains and to present what must be accepted as absolute proof of the correctness of his idea. His discovery may attract attention in all parts of the world, and he may become as widely known as the discoverer of electricity. Well, he might, no doubt, but for two trifling facts: A, if what he has discovered had not been known in the East, for ages, by the occultists as Gupta Maya or secret illusion, and, b. had not the Theosophical Society existed for over 15 years to tell the Elmore tale to every Gobmoosh inclined to believe in the miraculous and supernatural character of Indian, so-called jugglery. It is over 10 years ago that all such phenomena, the more wondrous and phenomenal, for being simply scientific and explicable on natural principles, were repeatedly characterized by the present writer, when at Simla, as psychological tricks, to the great disgust of her over-enthusiastic friends. What these psychological tricks are in reality and the difference between them and conjuring will be explained further on. And now to the Tribune narrative. After stating every particular about Mr. Frederick S. Elmore, describing his childhood and college life, giving the color of his hair and the address and number of his family residence, the interviewer shows him, with a friend and classmate, Mr. George Lessing, one an enthusiastic photographer, the other a clever artist and draftsman in the land of the sacred cow and the wily fakir. In talking to a Tribune man of his remarkable experience in India, Mr. Elmore said, "We had done West India pretty thoroughly, and had spent some time in Calcutta. From there we went north, stopping for a short time at Rajmahal and Dinapur. From the latter city we went south to Gaya, which we reached in July last. Lessing and I had frequently talked over the Indian fakirs and their marvelous performances, and had determined upon making a careful test of their powers. So we were constantly on the alert for some first-class juggler. One afternoon Lessing rushed into the room where I was taking a snooze and told me there was a fakir in front about ready to begin his performances. I was as pleased as he. Neither of us had been able previous to this time to see one of these fellows, but we had arranged a little plan which we were to put into operation when opportunity offered. I had been impressed by a theory that the explanation of all their alleged supernatural performances would be found in hypnotism, but I did not know just how to get at it, until Lessing proposed this plan to test my theory. While the fakir was going through his performances, Lessing was to make a rapid pencil sketch of what he saw, while I at the same moment would take a snapshot with my Kodak. Being prepared to put this plan into operation, we went out from our abode, and there found the fakir and a crowd of natives and one or two Europeans. The fakir was a queer-looking chap. His hair was long and matted and his beard hung low on his breast. His only decoration was a copper ring or bracelet worn about his right arm between the wrist and the elbow. His eyes were remarkable both for their brilliancy and their intense depth, if I may so term it. They seemed to be almost jet black and were set unusually deep in his head. When we stepped into the little circle about him, those eyes took us in from sole to crown. He had spread upon the ground a coarse carpet of peculiar texture about 4 feet wide and 6 feet long. At his right stood a small earthen bowl, and across his knees lay a strange-looking musical instrument. Having received the signal that all was ready, he took the bowl in his hands and turned the contents, a reddish, sand-like mixture, out upon the carpet. He mixed it about with his fingers, apparently to show that it contained no concealed objects. Replacing the sand in the bowl, he stood it in the center of the carpet, several feet in front of his knees, and covered it with a small shawl, first placing in the mixture several seeds of the mango fruit. Then he played a weird air on his pipe, swayed back and forth, and as he did so, slowly took in each member of the crowd of the spectators with those marvelous eyes of his. The swaying and pipe playing lasted 2 or 3 minutes. Then he suddenly stopped and raised one corner of the shawl. We saw several green shoots 2 or 3 inches high. He replaced the shawl, played a little more on his pipe, and I could have sworn I saw the shawl pushed 3 feet into the air. Again he stopped and removed the shawl. This time there was a perfect tree, 2 feet or more in height, with long slender flat leaves. Lessing nudged me and I took my picture while he made a skeleton sketch. While we were watching this creation of the queer old man, it seemed to vanish before our eyes. When it was gone, he removed the bowl and spread the shawl on the ground before him. Then there was more music and more swaying, more looking at the ground, and as we watched the dirty square of cloth he had placed on the ground, we saw outlined beneath it some moving object. As we watched, he grasped the shawl by each of two corners and snatched it from the ground. Upon the spot where it had rested but a moment before, there sat the queerest dimpled Indian baby that I had seen in my travels. Lessing kept his nerve better than I did. I would have forgotten what I was doing if he had not reminded me. I took the picture and he made his sketch. The baby remained but a moment, before Mr. Fakir recovered it with the shawl, and drawing a knife cut and slashed at the spot where the infant sat. In another instant he threw away the shawl and there was nothing there. We had scarce time to recover from our astonishment when the Fakir drew from under his knee a ball of grey twine. Taking the loose end between his teeth, he, with a quick upward motion, tossed the ball into the air. Instead of coming back to him, it kept on going up and up until out of sight, and there remained only the long swaying end. When we looked down after trying to see where the ball had gone, we were all astonished to see standing beside the Fakir a boy about 6 years old. He had not been there when the ball was tossed into the air, but he was there now, and at a word from the Fakir he walked over to the twine and began climbing it, a good deal after the fashion of a monkey climbing a grapevine. As he was starting, I got his range and made a picture of him, Lessing at the same time making a sketch. The boy disappeared when he had reached a point 30 or 40 feet from the ground, at least we could not see him. A moment later the twine disappeared. Then the Fakir arose, rolled up his carpet, took the bowl away, and passed among the crowd soliciting contributions. I had no facilities for developing the Kodak films, and it was these Lessing took with him, as well as 1,000 or more other negatives, to be developed. The Fakir pictures with a few others, I received this afternoon. After the Fakir's departure Lessing filled in his sketches and these he left with me. You'll see by comparing the ones Lessing made with the photographs that in no instance did the camera record the marvelous features of the performance. For instance, Lessing's sketch shows the tree grown from the bush, while the camera shows there was no bush there. Lessing saw a baby, and so did I, and he has got it in his sketch, but the camera demonstrates that there was no baby. Lessing's sketch of the boy climbing the twine is evidence that he saw it, but the camera says there was no boy and no twine. From which I'm compelled to believe that my theory is absolutely correct, that Mr. Fakir had simply hypnotized the entire crowd, but couldn't hypnotize the camera. I'm going to write an history of the affair and have copies made of the pictures and forward them to the London Society for Psychical Research. I have no doubt it will make good use of them. Nor have we any doubt, upon this. The S.P.R. is sure to make as good use of the sketches, by M.R. Lessing and the photographic pictures by Mr. Elmore, as it has made of the hundreds of its seances with spiritual mediums, and the evidence furnished by the Theosophist, unable to trace the things to its much beloved telepathic impact, it will brand the whole round of the above enumerated well-known juggler phenomena as prestidigitation, sleight of hand and conjuring tricks a la Masklin and Cook. For this is usually the only explanation given by the learned society of all that it does not understand and is incapable of understanding. We wish Messrs. Elmore and Lessing joy, and must say a few words on the subject, for their further and personal benefit. First of all, we ask them why they call the juggler a fakir? If he is the one he cannot be the other, for a fakir is simply a Mussulman devotee whose whole time is taken up by acts of holiness, such as standing for days on one leg, or on the top of his head, and who pays no attention to any other phenomena. Nor could their juggler be a yogi, the latter title being incompatible with taking up collections after the exhibition of his psychic powers. The man they saw then at Gaya was simply, as they very correctly state, a public juggler, or as he is generally called in India, a Jadoala, sorcerer, and a producer of illusions, whether Hindu or Mohammedan. As a genuine juggler, i.e., one who makes us professions of showing the supernatural phenomena or siddhis of a yogi, he would be quite as entitled to the use of conjuring tricks as a Hoffman or Masklin and Cook. Well, the latter gentlemen, and all the wizards of the north as well, are invited to repeat if they can, even such juggling phenomena as the above, clad, or rather unclad, as such jugglers are, and under the canopy of the heavens, instead of the roof and ceiling of a hall or a theater. They will never be able to do so. And why? Because these jugglers are not sleight-of-hand conjurers. They are regular and genuine psychologists, mesmerizers endowed with the most phenomenal powers, hitherto unknown to, and quite unpracticed in Europe, save in a few exceptional cases. And with regard to this point, basing our questions on the logic of analogy, if such phenomenal powers of fascination as throwing glamour over audiences often numbering several hundreds and even thousands, are once proven to exist in simple professional jugglers, who can deny the same powers, only 20 times as strong, in trained adepts in occultism? This is the future nut for the Society for Psychical Research to crack if it ever accepts Mr. Elmore's testimony, which we doubt. But if it is accepted, what right will its members or the public have to doubt the claims made on behalf of great yogis and learned adepts and Mahatmas to produce far more wonderful phenomena? The fact alone, forsooth, that a whole audience sees a twine thrown into the air, one the end of which seems fastened in the clouds, a boy climbing up it, a baby under a basket, and a mango tree growing, when there is, in truth, neither twine nor boy, neither baby nor mango tree, may well give us the right to call it the greatest mental miracle possible, a psychological trick true enough, but one never to be rivaled, nor even approached. One Vidi Isis unveiled I, 73, 495, et sec. By a physical phenomenon, however astounding. It is only hypnotism, you say. Then those who say so, do not know the difference between hypnotism, which, at best, is only a purely physiological manifestation even in the hands of the most powerful and learned experimenters, and real mesmerism, let alone Mahamaya or even the Guptamaya of ancient and modern India. We defy all, and every one, from Charcot and Richer down to all the second-rate hypnotizers, including the greatest physical mediums, to produce that with which Messrs. Elmore and Lessing credit their juggler. To those who are incapable of appreciating the all-importance of that psycho-spiritual power in man which the Tribune calls so ignorantly and so foolishly hypnotism, all we may say would be useless. We simply refuse to answer them. As to those others who will understand us, we say yes, it is glamour, fascination, psychology, call it what you will, but it is not hypnotism. The latter is an aberration produced on several persons in turn by another person, through contact, through gazing at a bright spot or manipulation. But what is it in comparison with the collective and instantaneous fascination produced on hundreds by one passing gaze of the juggler, vidi supra, even though that gaze did take in every man from soul to crown? No theosophist who understands anything of occultism, has ever explained such phenomena on any principle but that of magic, spell and fascination, and to claim for them anything else would amount to teaching supernaturalism and miracle, i.e., an impossibility in nature. There is a host of theosophists in England alone, who would testify any day that they have been taught for now many years that physical phenomena in India are due to glamour and the psychological powers of the performers. Yet no one in the Theosophical Society ever thought of claiming for himself the discovery and explanation of the mango tree mystery, as it is a teaching known for long ages, and now once more taught to all who want to know. Nevertheless, as said at the beginning of this article, we all owe a debt of gratitude to Mr. Elmore and his friend, for their clever idea of applying to these tricks, the photographic test, as, no glamour, or, as the reporter makes Elmore say, hypnotism, could affect the camera. Moreover, both the young traveler and the Tribune reporter seem to have worked only for the Theosophical Society. Indeed, it is safe to prophesy that no one, including the Society for Psychical Research, will pay much attention to Mr. Elmore's discovery, since the latter, the erroneous name of hypnotism notwithstanding, is only a fact and a truth. Thus, it is the Theosophical Society alone which will benefit by having one more of its teachings corroborated by independent and undeniable evidence. Two additional corroboration of occult teaching is given in a pamphlet entitled Materialism, Agnosticism, and Theosophy issued by the Pacific Coast Committee for Theosophical Works, in connection with this very point, i.e., nebulae. Some 3 years ago, Madame Blavatsky, that bête noire of both religion and science, declared that if scientists could perfect instruments sufficiently powerful to penetrate these nebula *, they would perceive the falsity of this assumption of the universal action of gravitation. It passed without notice. But quite recently a California scientist has most unexpectedly confirmed this seemingly idle statement. One of the first results of the inspection of the heavens through the Great Lick telescope, was the cautious announcement by Professor Holden that the arrangement of matter in many of the nebulae would seem to point directly to the conclusion that some other force than gravitation was the active agent. Theosophist, February 1884. Introversion of mental vision. Interesting experiments have recently been tried by Mr. F. W. H. Myers and his colleagues of the Psychic Research Society of London, which, if properly examined, are capable of yielding highly important results. The experiments referred to were on their publication widely commented upon by the newspaper press. With the details of these we are not at present concerned. It will suffice for our purpose to state for the benefit of readers unacquainted with the experiments, that in a very large majority of cases, too numerous to be the result of mere chance, it was found that the thought-reading sensitive obtained but an inverted mental picture of the object given him to read. A piece of paper, containing the representation of an arrow, was held before a carefully blindfolded thought reader and its position constantly changed, the thought reader being requested to mentally see the arrow at each turn. In these circumstances it was found that when the arrow head pointed to the right, it was read off as pointing to the left, and so on. This led some sapient journalists to imagine that there was a mirage in the inner as well as on the outer plane of optical sensation. But the real explanation of the phenomenon lies deeper. It is well known that an object as seen by us and its image on the retina of the eye, are not exactly the same in position, but quite the reverse. How the image of an object on the retina is inverted in sensation, is a mystery which physical science is admittedly incapable of solving. Western metaphysics too, without regard to this point, hardly fares any better. There are as many theories as there are metaphysicians. Reed, Hamilton, and others of that school but flounder in a bog of speculation. The only philosopher who has obtained a glimpse of the truth is the idealist Berkeley, who, to the extreme regret of all students of the true philosophy, could not get beyond theological Christianity, in spite of all his brilliant intuitions. A child, says Berkeley, does really see a thing inverted from our standpoint. To touch its head it stretches out its hands in the same direction of its body as we do of ours to reach our feet. Repeated failures in this direction give experience and lead to the correction of the notions born of one sense by those derived through another. The sensations of distance and solidity are produced in the same way. The application of this knowledge to the above-mentioned experiments of the Psychic Research Society will lead to very striking results. If the trained adept is a person who has developed all his interior faculties, and is on the psychic plane in the full possession of his senses, the individual, who accidentally, that is without occult training, gains the inner sight, is in the position of a helpless child, a sport of the freaks of one isolated inner sense. This will throw a flood of light on the untrustworthy character of the ordinary untrained seer. Such was the case with the sensitives with whom Mr. Myers and his colleagues experimented. There are instances, however, when the correction of one sense by another takes place involuntarily and accurate results are brought out. When the sensitive reads the thoughts in a man's mind, this correction is not required, for the will of the thinker shoots the thoughts, as it were, straight into the mind of the sensitive. The introversion under notice will, moreover, be found to take place only in the instance of such images which cannot be affected by the ordinary sense experience of the sensitive. To take the image of a dog for instance, when the sensitive perceives it as existing in the mind of a person or on a piece of paper, it may appear distorted to the inner perception of the sensitive, but his physical experience would always correct it. But this introversion is sure to take place when the direction faced by the dog is the subject of investigation. A difficulty may here suggest itself with regard to the names of persons or the words, thought of for the sensitive's reading. But allowance must in such cases be made for the operation of the thinker's will, which forces the thought into the sensitive's mind, and thereby renders the process of introversion unnecessary. It is abundantly clear from this that the best way of studying these phenomena is when only one set of willpower, that of the sensitive, is in play. This takes place always when the object the sensitive is to read, is independent of the will of any other person, as in the case of its being represented on paper or any other thing of the kind. Applying the same law to dreams, we can find the rationale of the popular superstition that facts are generally inverted in dreams. Introversion of mental vision. 31. To dream of something good is generally taken to be the precursor of something evil. In the exceptional cases in which dreams have been found to be prophetic, the dreamer was either affected by another's will or under the operation of some disturbing forces, which cannot be calculated except for each particular case. In this connection, another very important psychic phenomenon may be noticed. Instances are too numerous and too well authenticated to be amenable to dispute, in which an occurrence at a distance, for instance the death of a person, has pictured itself to the mental vision of one interested in the occurrence. In such cases the double of the dying man appears even at a great distance and becomes visible usually to his friend only, but instances are not rare when the double is seen by a number of persons. The former case comes within the class of cases under consideration, as the concentrated thought of the dying man is clairvoyantly seen by the friend and the erect image is produced by the operation of the dying man's will energy, while the latter is the appearance of the genuine Mayavirupa, and therefore not governed by the law under discussion. Hypnotism, and its relations to other modes of fascination. We are asked by H.C. and other fellows, to answer the several queries hereafter propounded. We do so, but with a reservation. Our replies must be made from the standpoint of occultism alone, no consideration being given to such hypotheses of modern, another name for materialistic, science, as may clash with esoteric teachings. What is hypnotism? How does it differ from animal magnetism, or mesmerism? Hypnotism is the new scientific name for the old ignorant superstition variously called fascination and enchantment. It is an antiquated lie transformed into a modern truth. The fact is there, but the scientific explanation of it is still wanting. By some it is believed that hypnotism is the result of an irritation artificially produced on the periphery of the nerves, that this irritation reacting upon, passes into the cells of the brain substance, causing by exhaustion a condition which is but another mode of sleep, hypnosis. Or hypnose, by others that it is simply a self-induced stupor, produced chiefly by imagination, and c. It differs from animal magnetism where the hypnotic condition is produced by the braid method, which is a purely mechanical one, i.e., the fixing of the eyes on some bright spot, a metal or a crystal. It becomes animal magnetism, or mesmerism, when it is achieved by mesmeric passes on the patient, and for these reasons. When the first method is used, no electropsychic, or even electrophysical currents are at work, but simply the mechanical, molecular vibrations of the metal or crystal gazed at by the subject. It is the eye, the most occult organ of all, on the superficies of our body, which, by serving as a medium between that bit of metal or crystal and the brain, attunes the molecular vibrations of the nervous centers of the latter into unison, i.e., equality in the number of their respective oscillations, with the vibrations of the bright object held. And, it is this unison which produces the hypnotic state. But in the second case, the right name for hypnotism would certainly be animal magnetism, or that so much derided term mesmerism. For, in the hypnotization by preliminary passes, it is the human will, whether conscious or otherwise, of the operator himself, that acts upon the nervous system of the patient. And it is again through the vibrations only atomic, not molecular, produced by that act of energy called will in the ether of space, therefore, on quite a different plane, that the superhypnotic state, For those which we call will vibrations and air aura, are absolutely distinct from the vibrations produced by the simply mechanical molecular motion, the two acting on two separate degrees of the cosmoterrestrial planes. Here, of course, a clear realization of that which is meant by will in occult sciences, is necessary. In both hypnotism and animal magnetism, there is an act of will in the operator, a transit of something from him to his patient, an effect upon the patient. What is the something transmitted in both cases? Ans. That which is transmitted has no name in European languages, and if we simply describe it as will, it loses all its meaning. The old and very much tabooed words, enchantment, fascination, glamour and spell, and especially the verb to bewitch expressed far more suggestively the real action that took place during the process of such a transmission, than the modern and meaningless terms, psychologize and biologize. Occultism calls the force transmitted, the auric fluid, to distinguish it from auric. Light, the fluid, being a correlation of atoms on a higher plane, and a descent to this lower one, in the shape of impalpable and invisible plastic substances, generated and directed by the potential will, the auric light, or that which Reichenbach calls OD, a light that surrounds every animate and inanimate object in nature, is, on the other hand, but the astral reflection emanating from objects, its particular color and colors, the combinations and varieties of the latter, denoting the state of thegramasy or qualities and characteristics of each special object and subject, the human being's aura being the strongest of all. What is the rationale of vampirism? Ans. If by this word is meant the involuntary transmission of a portion of one's vitality, or life essence, by a kind of occult osmosis, from one person to another, the latter being endowed, or afflicted rather, with such vampirizing faculty, then, the act can become comprehensible only when we study well the nature and essence of the semi-substantial auric fluid spoken of just now. Like every other occult force, in nature, this indoned exosmosic process may be made beneficent or maleficent, either unconsciously or at will. When a healthy operator mesmerizes a patient with a determined desire to relieve and cure him, the exhaustion felt by the former is proportionate to the relief given, a process ofendosmosehns taken place, the healer having parted with a portion of his vital aura to benefit the sick man. Vampirism, on the other hand, is a blind and mechanical process, generally produced without the knowledge of either the absorber, or the vampirized party. It is conscious or unconscious black magic, as the case may be. For in the case of trained adepts and sorcerers, the process is produced consciously and with the guidance of the will. In both cases the agent of transmission is a magnetic and attractive faculty, terrestrial and physiological in its results, yet generated and produced on the four-dimensional plane, the realm of atoms. Under what circumstances is hypnotism black magic? Ans. Under those just discussed, but to cover the subject fully, even by giving a few instances, demands more space than we can spare for these answers. Sufficient to say that whenever the motive which actuates the operator is selfish, or detrimental to any living being or beings, all such acts are classed by us as black magic. The healthy vital fluid imparted by the physician who mesmerizes his patient can and does cure, but too much of it will kill. This statement receives its explanation in our answer to question 6, when showing that the vibratory experiment shatters a turn1 beer to pieces. Is there any difference between hypnosis produced by mechanical means, such as revolving mirrors, and that produced by the direct gaze of the operator, fascination? Ans. This difference is, we believe, already pointed out in the answer to question 1. The gaze of the operator is more potent, hence more dangerous, than the simple mechanical passes of the hypnotizer, who, in 9 cases out of 10, does not know how, and therefore cannot will. The students of esoteric science must be aware by the very laws of the occult correspondences that the former action is performed on the first plane of matter, the lowest, while the latter, which necessitates a well-concentrated will, has to be enacted, if the operator is a profane novice, on the fourth, and if he is anything of an occultist on the fifth plane. Why should a bit of crystal or a bright button throw one person into the hypnotic state and affect in no way another person? An answer to this would, we think, solve more than one perplexity. Science has offered several varied hypotheses upon the subject, but has not, so far, accepted any one of these as definite. This is because all such speculations revolve in the vicious circle of materiophysical phenomena with their blind forces and mechanical theories. The auric fluid is not recognized by the men of science, and therefore, they reject it. But have they not believed for years in the efficacy of metallotherapeutic, the influence of these metals being due to the action of their electric fluids or currents on the nervous system? And this, simply because an analogy was found to exist between the activity of the system and electricity. The theory failed, because it clashed with the most careful observation and experiments. First of all, it was contradicted by a fundamental fact exhibited in the said metallotherapeutic, whose characteristic peculiarity showed, a. that by no means every metal acted on every nervous disease, one patient being sensitive to some one metal, while all others produced no effect upon him, and, b. that the patients affected by certain metals were few and exceptional. This showed that electric fluids operating on and curing diseases existed only in the imagination of the theorists. Had they had any actual existence, then all metals would affect in a greater or lesser degree all patients, and every metal, taken separately, would affect every case of nervous disease, the conditions for generating such fluids being, in the given cases, precisely the same. Thus Dr. Charcot, having vindicated Dr. Burke, the once discredited discoverer of metallotherapeutic, Schiff, and others discredited all those who believed in electric fluids, and these seem now to be given up in favor of molecular motion, which now reigns supreme in physiology for the time being, of course. But now arises a question: are the real nature, behavior, and conditions of motion known any better than the nature, behavior, and conditions of the fluids? It is to be doubted. Anyhow, occultism is audacious enough to maintain that electric or magnetic fluids, the two being really identical, are due in their essence and origin to that same molecular motion, now transformed into atomic energy, to which every other phenomenon in nature is also due. Indeed, when the needle-o galvano or electrometer fails to show any oscillations denoting the presence of electric or magnetic fluids, this does not prove in the least that there are none such to record, but simply that having passed on to another and higher plane of action, the electrometer can no longer be affected by the energy displayed on a plane with which it is entirely disconnected. The above had to be explained, in order to show that the nature of the force transmitted from one man or object to another man or object, whether in hypnotism, electricity, metallotherapeutic, or fascination, is the same in essence, varying only in degree, and modified according to the subplane of matter it is acting on, of which subplanes, as every occultist knows, there are 7 on our terrestrial plane as there are on every other. Is science entirely wrong in its definition of the hypnotic phenomena? It has no definition, so far. Now, if there is one thing upon which occultism agrees, to a certain degree, with the latest discoveries of physical science, it is that all the bodies endowed with the property of inducing and calling metallotherapeutic and other analogous phenomena, have, their great variety notwithstanding, one feature in common. They are all the fountainheads and the generators of rapid molecular oscillations, which, whether through transmitting agents or direct contact, communicate themselves to the nervous system, changing thereby the rhythm of nervous vibrations on the sole condition, however, of being what is called, in unison. Now, unison does not always imply the sameness of nature, or of essence, but simply the sameness of degree, a similarity with regard to gravity and acuteness, and equal potentialities for intensity of sound or motion. A bell may be in unison with a violin, and a flute with an animal or a human organ. Moreover, the rate of the number of vibrations especially in an organic animal cell or organ, changes in accordance with the state of health, and general condition. Hence the cerebral nervous centers of a hypnotic subject, while in perfect unison, in potential degree and essential original activity, with the object he gazes at, may yet, owing to some organic disturbance, beat the given moment at loggerheads. 1. In occultism the word atom has a special significance, different from the one given to it by science. See editorial. Psychic and noetic action, in the two last numbers. With it, in respect to the number of their respective vibrations. In such case no hypnotic condition ensues, or no unison at all may exist between his nervous cells and the cells of the crystal or metal he is made to gaze at, in which case that particular object can never have any effect upon him. This amounts to saying that to ensure success in a hypnotic experiment, two conditions are requisite. As every organic or inorganic body in nature is distinguished by its fixed molecular oscillations, it is necessary to find out which are those bodies which will act in unison with one or another human nervous system, and, to remember that the molecular oscillations of the former can influence the nervous action of the latter, only when the rhythms of their respective vibrations coincide, i.e., when the number of their oscillations is made identical, which in the cases of hypnotism induced by mechanical means, is achieved through the medium of the eye. Therefore, though the difference between hypnosis produced by mechanical means, and that induced by the direct gaze of the operator, his will, depends on the plane on which the same phenomenon is produced, still the fascinating or subduing agent is created by the same force at work. In the physical world and its material planes, it is called motion. In the worlds of mentality and metaphysics it is known as will, the many-faced magician throughout all nature. As the rate of vibrations, molecular motion, in metals, woods, crystals, etc., alters under the effect of heat, cold, etc., so do the cerebral molecules change their rate, in the same way, i.e., their rate is raised or lowered. And this is what really takes place in the phenomenon of hypnotism. In the case of gazing, it is the eye the chief agent of the will of the active operator, but a slave and traitor when this will is dormant that, unconsciously to the patient or subject, attunes the oscillations of his cerebral nervous centers to the rate of the vibrations of the object gazed at by catching the rhythm of the latter and passing it on to the brain. But in the case of direct passes, it is the will of the operator radiating through his eye that produces the required unison between his will and the will of the person operated upon. 4. Out of two objects attuned in unison as two chords, for instance, one will always be weaker than the other, and thus have mastery over the other and even the potentiality of destroying its weaker co-respondent. So true is this, that we can call upon physical science to corroborate this fact. Take the sensitive flame as a case in hand. Science tells us that if a note be struck in unison with the ratio of the vibrations of the heat molecules, the flames will respond immediately to the sound, or note struck, that it will dance and sing in rhythm with the sounds. But occult science adds, that the flame may also be extinguished if the sound is intensified, vide Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, 606 and 607. Another proof. Take a wine glass or tumbler of very fine and clear glass, produce, by striking it gently with a silver spoon, a well-determined note, after which reproduce the same note by rubbing its rim with a damp finger, and, if you are successful, the glass will immediately crack and be shattered. Indifferent to every other sound, the glass will not resist the great intensity of its own fundamental note, for that particular vibration will cause such a commotion in its particles, that the whole fabric will fall in pieces. Q. What becomes of diseases cured by hypnotism? Are they really cured or are they postponed, or do they appear in another form? Are diseases karma, and, if so, is it right to attempt to cure them? ANS. Hypnotic suggestion may cure forever, and it may not. All depends on the degree of magnetic relations between the operator and the patient. // karmic, they will be only postponed, and return in some other form, not necessarily of disease, but as a punitive evil of another sort. It is always right to try and alleviate suffering whenever we can, and to do our best for it. Because a man suffers justly imprisonment, and catches cold in his damp cell, is it a reason why the prison doctor should not try to cure him of it? Q. Is it necessary that the hypnotic suggestions of the operator should be spoken? Is it not enough for him to think them, and may not even he be ignorant or unconscious of the bent he is impressing on his subject? ANS. Certainly not. The rapport between the two is once for all firmly established. Thought is more powerful than speech in cases of a real subjugation of the will of the patient to that of his operator. But, on the other hand, unless the suggestion made is for the good only of the subject, and entirely free from any selfish motive, a suggestion by thought is an act of black magic still more pregnant with evil consequences than a spoken suggestion. It is always wrong and unlawful to deprive a man of his free will, unless for his own or society's good, and even the former has to be done with great discrimination. Occultism regards all such promiscuous attempts as black magic and sorcery, whether conscious or otherwise. Q. Do the motive and character of the operator affect the result, immediate or remote? ANS. Insofar as the hypnotizing process becomes under his operation either white or black magic, as the last answer shows. Q. Is it wise to hypnotize a patient not only out of disease, but out of a habit, such as drinking or lying? ANS. It is an act of charity and kindness, and this is next to wisdom. For, although the dropping of his vicious habits will add nothing to his good karma, which it would, had his efforts to reform been personal, of his own free will, and necessitating a great mental and physical struggle, still a successful suggestion prevents him from generating more bad karma, and adding constantly to the previous record of his transgressions. Q. What is it that a faith healer, when successful, practices upon himself? What tricks is he playing with his principles and with his karma? ANS. Imagination is a potent help in every event of our lives. Imagination acts on faith, and both are the draftsmen who prepare the sketches for will to engrave, more or less deeply, on the rocks of obstacles and opposition with which the path of life is strewn. Says Paracelsus, faith must confirm the imagination, for faith establishes the will. Determined will is the beginning of all magical operations. It is because men do not perfectly imagine and believe the result, that the arts of magic are uncertain, while they might be perfectly certain. This is all the secret. Half, if not 2/3 of our ailings and diseases are the fruit of our imagination and fears. Destroy the latter and give another bent to the former, and nature will do the rest. There is nothing sinful or injurious in the methods per se. They turn to harm only when belief in his power becomes too arrogant and marked in the faith healer, and when he thinks he can will away such diseases as need, if they are not to be fatal, the mediate help of expert surgeons and physicians. H.P.B. A case of obsession. He particulars of the case of obsession, alluded to in the April number of this magazine, are given in the following letter from a respectable English medical man who is in attendance upon the victim. I take the liberty of addressing you in the cause of humanity, with the intention of exciting your sympathies and obtaining all the aid in your power to afford, in a case of control. You will understand that the gentleman is being made a medium against his wish, through having attended a few stances for the purpose of witnessing materialization. Ever since, he has been more or less subject to a series of persecutions by the controlling spirit, and, in spite of every effort of his to throw off the influence, he has been made to suffer most shamefully and painfully in very many ways and under most trying and aggravating circumstances, especially by his thoughts being forced into forbidden channels without external causes being present, the bodily functions overruled. Even being caused to bite his tongue and cheeks severely whilst eating, and subjected to every species of petty annoyances which will serve as a means for the control, unknown, to sustain and establish the connection. The details are in their most painful features not such as I can write to you, but if there be any means known to you whereby the influence can be diverted, and it is thought necessary to be more particular in my description of this case, I will send you all the information I possess. So little is known in India of the latest and most startling phase of Western mediumistic phenomena, materialization, that a few words of explanation are needed to make this case understood. Briefly, then, for several years, in the presence of certain mediums in America and Europe, there have been seen, often under good test conditions, apparitions of the dead, which in every respect seem like living human beings. They walk about, write messages to present and absent friends, speak audibly in the languages familiar to them in life, even though the medium may be unacquainted with them, and are dressed in the garb they wore when alive. Many cases of fraudulent personation of the dead have been detected. Pretended mediums have sometimes gone on for years deceiving the credulous, and real ones, whose psychical powers have been. A case of obsession apparently proved beyond doubt, have been caught playing tricks in some evil hour when they have yielded to either the love of money or notoriety. Still, making every allowance for all these, there is a residuum of veritable cases of the materialization, or the making visible, tangible, and audible of portrait figures of dead people. These wonderful phenomena have been variously regarded by investigators. Most spiritualists have looked upon them as the most precious proofs of the soul survival, while Theosophists, acquainted with the views of the ancient theurgists, and the still more ancient Aryan philosophers, have viewed them as at best misleading deceptions of the senses, fraught with danger to the physical and moral natures of both medium and spectator if the latter chances to be susceptible to certain psychical influences. These students of occultism have noticed that the mediums for materializations have too often been ruined in health by the drain upon their systems, and wrecked in morals. They have over and again warned the spiritualistic public that mediumship was a most dangerous gift, one only to be tolerated under great precautions. And for this they have received much abuse and few thanks. Still, one's duty must be done at every cost, and the case now before us affords a valuable text for one more bit of friendly counsel. We need not stop to discuss the question whether the so-called materialized forms above described are or are not those of the deceased they look like. That may be held in reserve until the bottom facts of Oriental psychical science are better understood. Nor need we argue as to whether there has ever been an authentic materialization. The London experiences of Mr. William Crookes, F.R.S., and the American ones of Colonel Alcott, both so widely known and of so convincing a character, give us a sufficient basis of fact to argue upon. We assume the reality of materializations, and shall take the instance cited by the English physician as a subject for diagnosis. The patient then is described as having been controlled since attending circles where there were materializations, and as having become the bond-slave of some evil powers which force him to say and do awful and even disgusting things, despite his resistance. Why is this? How can a man be compelled to so act against his will? What is obsession? 3 brief questions these are, but most difficult to explain to an uninitiated public. The laws of obsession can only be well understood by him who has sounded the depths of Indian philosophy. The only clue to the secret, which the West possesses, is contained in that most beneficent science, magnetism or mesmerism. That does teach the existence of a vital fluid within and about the human being, the fact of different human polarities, and the possibility of one person projecting this fluid or force at will, to and upon another person differently polarized. Baron Reichenbach's theory of odile or odic force shows us the existence of this same fluid in the mineral and vegetable as well as the animal kingdoms. To complete the chain of evidence, Buchanan's discovery of the psychometrical faculty in man enables us to prove, by the help of this faculty, that a subtle influence is exerted by people upon the houses and even the localities they live in, the paper they write upon, the clothing they wear, the portion of the universal ether, the Aryan accusa, they exist in, and that this is a permanent influence, perceptible even at the most distant epochs from the time when the individual lived and exerted this influence. In one word, we may say that the discoveries of Western science corroborate most fully the hints thrown out by Greek sages and the more defined theories of certain Indian philosophers. Indians and Buddhists believe alike that thought and deed are both material, that they survive, that the evil desires and the good ones of a man environ him in a world of his own making, that these desires and thoughts take on shapes that become real to him after death, and that moksha, in the one case, and nirvana, in the other, cannot be attained until the disembodied soul has passed quite through the shadow world of the haunting thoughts, and become divested of the last spot of its earthly taint. The progress of Western discovery in this direction has been and must ever be very gradual. From the phenomena of gross to those of more sublimated matter, and thence on towards the mysteries of spirit is the hard road made necessary by the precepts of Aristotle. Western science first ascertained that our outcoming breath is charged with carbonic acid and, in excess, becomes fatal to human life, then, that certain dangerous diseases are passed from person to person in the sporules thrown off into the air from the sick body, then, that man projects upon every body and everything he encounters a magnetic aura peculiar to himself, and, finally, the physical disturbance set up in the ether in the process of thought evolution is now postulated. Another step in advance will be to realize the magical creative power of the human mind, and the fact that moral taint is just as transmissible as physical. The influence of bad companions will then be understood to imply a degrading personal magnetism, more subtle than the impressions conveyed to the eye or the ear by the sights and sounds of a vicious company. The latter may be repelled by resolutely avoiding to see or hear what is bad, but the former enwraps the sensitive and penetrates his very being if he but stop where the moral poison is floating in the air. Gregory's Animal Magnetism, Reichenbach v. Researches, and Denton's Soul of Things will make much of this plain to the Western inquirer, though neither of those authors traces the connection of his favorite branch of science with the parent stock Indian psychology. Keeping the present case in view, we see a man highly susceptible to magnetic impressions, ignorant of the nature of materializations and, therefore, unable to protect himself against bad influences, brought in contact with promiscuous circles where the impressionable medium has long been the unwitting nucleus of evil. Magnetisms, his system saturated with emanations of the surviving thoughts and desires of those who are living and those who are dead. The reader is referred to an interesting paper by Judge Gedgil of Baroda, Cr. December number, on Hindu ideas about communion with the dead, for a plain exposition of this question. Of earth-tide souls, or Pisachas. It is considered, says that writer, that in this state, the soul, being deprived of the means of enjoyment of sensual pleasures through its own physical body, is perpetually tormented by hunger, appetite, and other bodily desires, and can have only vicarious enjoyment by entering into the living physical bodies of others, or by absorbing the subtlest essences of libations and oblations offered for their own sake. What is there to surprise us in the fact that a negatively polarized man, a man of a susceptible temperament, being suddenly brought into a current of foul emanations from some vicious person, perhaps still living or perhaps dead, absorbs the insidious poison as rapidly as quicklime does moisture, until he is saturated with it? Thus, a susceptible body will absorb the virus of smallpox, or cholera, or typhus, and we need only recall this to draw the analogy which occult science affirms to be warranted. Near the earth's surface there hangs over us to Yosi a convenient simile, a steamy moral fog, composed of the undispersed exhalations of human vice and passion. This fog penetrates the sensitive to the very soul's core, his psychic self absorbs it as the sponge does water, or as fresh milk effluvia. It benumbs his moral sense, spurs his baser instincts into activity, overpowers his good resolutions. As the fumes of a wine vault make the brain reel, or as the choke damp stifles one's breath in a mine, so this heavy cloud of immoral influences carries away the sensitive beyond the limits of self-control, and he becomes obsessed, like our English patient. What remedy is there to suggest? Does not our very diagnosis indicate that the sensitive must have his sensitiveness destroyed, the negative polarity must be changed to a positive, he must become active instead of passive? He can be helped by a magnetizer who understands the nature of obsession, and who is morally pure and physically healthy, it must be a powerful magnetizer, a man of commanding will force. But the fight for freedom will, after all, have to be fought by the patient himself. His willpower must be aroused. He must expel the poison from his system. Inch by inch he must win back the lost ground. He must realize that it is a question of life or death, salvation or ruin, and strive for victory, like one who makes a last and heroic effort to save his life. His diet must be of the simplest. He must neither eat animal food, nor touch any stimulant, nor put himself in any company where there is the smallest chance for unclean thoughts to be provoked. He should be alone as little as possible, but his companions should be carefully chosen. He should take exercise and be much in the open air, use wood fire, instead of coals. Every indication that the bad influence was still working within him should be taken as a challenge to control his thoughts and compel them to dwell upon pure, elevating, spiritual things, at every hazard and with a determination to suffer anything rather than give way. If this man can have such a spirit infused into him, and his physician can secure the benevolent help of a strong, healthy magnetizer, of pure character, he may be saved. A case almost exactly like this one, except that the patient was a lady, came under our notice in America. The same advice as the above was given and followed, and the obsessing devil was driven out and has been kept out ever since. ISIS Unveiled, a master key to the mysteries of ancient and modern science and theology by H.P. Blavatsky Vol. I Science, XLV plus 628 pages. Vol. 2 Theology, 4 plus 640 pp. This exhaustive study of religion and science was Madame Blavatsky's first presentation of theosophy to the modern world. It is reproduced in photographic facsimile of the original edition, 1877, 2 volumes bound in one, cloth, complete with general index and supplementary topical index. American edition The Secret Doctrine, The Synthesis of Science, Religion, and Philosophy by H.P. Blavatsky Vol. I Cosmogenesis, Slay I plus 676 pages. Volume U Anthropogenesis, 14 plus 798 pages. A systematic development of theosophical teachings on cosmogenesis, anthropogenesis, symbolism, comparative religion, with extensive comparisons of ancient wisdom with scientific conceptions. Facsimile of original, 1888, edition, 2 volumes bound in one, cloth, complete with index, XXXPP. American edition index to The Secret Doctrine, all volume and page reference to the original edition, London 1888, and to the photographic facsimile reproduction, listed above. Reprint X plus 172 pages. American edition The Key to Theosophy, an exposition, in question and answer, of the ethics, science, and philosophy of theosophy by H.P. Blavatsky. Reprint of original edition, 1889, 15 plus 367 pages. Indian edition The Voice of the Silence, by H.P. Blavatsky. A blank verse rendition of chosen fragments from the Book of the Golden Precepts, belonging to the Contemplative or Mahayana, Yogacaryo, school. Reprint of the original edition, 1889, 4 plus 79 pages, cloth. Indian edition Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge, by H.P. Blavatsky. Reprint of the original, 1923, XXIV plus 149 pages, cloth. American edition A Modern Panarayan, by H.P. Blavatsky. A collection of fugitive fragments. American edition The Ocean of Theosophy by William Q. Judge. A comprehensive text on the theosophical philosophy by a co-founder of the theosophical movement, widely used as a text in study classes. Reprint of original edition, 1893, 15 plus 182 pages. Indian edition The Bhagavad Gita rendered into English by William Q. Judge. An ancient dialogue of philosophical religion from the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, cloth, 18 plus 133 pages. Indian edition Notes on the Bhagavad Gita by W. Q. Judge, Indian edition Letters that have helped me by W. Q. Judge, American edition, and shorter Indian edition The Friendly Philosopher, compiled from Letters and Talks by Robert Crosby, 415 pages, cloth. American edition Universal Theosophy by Robert Crosby, Indian edition 5 Years of Theosophy Essays selected from the Theosophist. American edition Order from Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4, Sir Krishna Rao Road, Bangalore 560,004 India.